This is part 2 of the video series Baptist Business Meetings. As I was looking at this, it looks like I left off to a good place, unfinished business. One of the things I mentioned in the last video, and I'm trying to keep these about an hour each, but one of the things I mentioned was that it's not old business, but it's unfinished business. A lot of people call it old business, and I suppose it's not really as bad of a term as what parliamentarians tell you it is, but parliamentarians really don't like this term old business, even though many people use it that way. Robert's Rules of Order New Revised calls this a common mistake. And most of the parliamentarians I've talked to, at least the guys that are certified in that, they really look bad on the word old business. Unfinished business are any motions that are still under consideration when the previous meeting adjourned. So if there's a motion that was under consideration, somebody gets up, makes a motion to adjourn, and that motion carries, then even though that main motion was under consideration, the meeting will adjourn. But then when you come back, then that motion will be up for consideration again. So so that would be something of the nature of unfinished business. Unless the motion was postponed or the motion to adjourn was made while considering the motion, the moderator shouldn't even mention unfinished business. And this is, at a regular meeting, when the clerk reads the minutes, anything that's unfinished should be included in that. So you should be able to just listen to what the clerk reads and determine whether there's any unfinished business or not. Hopefully, as a moderator, you would look at that beforehand. You really want to know what's going to be coming up. You want to have some idea of okay, what reports are going to be given, what recommendations are going to be taken care of, and of course what items of business are going to be covered. You won't be able to know beforehand what items of new business will be covered, because anyone could bring that up. But for everything else, you really want to have some knowledge beforehand, so it doesn't catch you off guard. And so if there's nothing that's unfinished, then there's really no reason to mention it. Now, I've often heard people ask, well, is there any old business? And it's kind of there's old business and new business type things, what they're thinking, and that's part of the reason why you shouldn't be using the word old business, because it kind of implies that it's a business that, these are old things. These are things we've thought about before. But really, these should just be motions. If there's a motion that's under consideration, that's been put aside for some reason, either because of adjournment while considering it, or because of postponement, then those are the things that would fall under unfinished business. And there really isn't any old business. Everything should be considered either as reports, unfinished business, or new business. Postponed motions or motions made or motions under consideration, the moderator should bring each up in turn. So there may be a list of these. And when you get to unfinished business, you should have that list, and you should bring each one up, and it should be handled in turn. It could be, there'd be either voted on or discussed and voted on, or they could be put aside again to some extent. Unfinished business is not just something the church has been discussing for a while, and I already mentioned that. Then we get into new business. So what is new business? New business is anything that isn't related to a report or a postponed motion. This is where you would ask, as a moderator, you would ask, is there any new business? And keep in mind, at this point, you've done pretty much everything that you have planned to do. There's really nothing here that you're really expecting for something else to come up. Now in truth, there could be a case somebody comes up to you before the meeting or talks to you during the week and says, well, I want to bring this up at the next business meeting, and so you made aware of something. But this would not be something like, it's not a report from one of the committees. It's not something like that. It's not a motion that has been put aside until the next meeting. These are some things that people are just going to bring up, things that you wouldn't normally be aware of, and things that aren't going to be coming out of committees. And so this would be things that any member could bring up, some item of new business. Even someone that's on a committee, they may bring up an item of new business because it may not be related to a committee they're on. So they would be bringing up this item. So you would ask, is there any new business? At this point, any member can stand to be recognized by the moderator. In a smaller church, it may be they raise their hand, and even a very small church, they may just speak up. Not that that's recommended, but that's what you kind of expect out of a smaller church. And then that member can make a motion. Of course, when you handle that motion, you handle it like any other motion, and we will cover that more in detail a little bit later. Our next item of discussion here is adjourn, the closing of the meeting. It seems like people have a little bit of trouble figuring out what to do when it's time to adjourn. And there's a number of ways to adjourn a meeting. The most common way is when all business has been handled. You'd just say, as a moderator, you'd say, is there any more business? You'd wait a little bit, a few seconds. At this point, you probably have some idea whether there's someone about to make a motion or not. If there is, you definitely want to wait for them to do so. But there's got to reach a time in the meeting when you realize that, yeah, there's nothing more going on, and people's getting quiet, and so nothing's coming up. And so after a few seconds, no one's making any movements to the mic, no one's raising their hands or speaking up or any of that. You'd say, here now the meeting is adjourned. And that's it. I mean, that's all you have to do. There's no motion required in this situation. All the business is completed, so there's no motion. It's if you want to call the motion, technically speaking, yeah, adjourning would be a motion. Even in this case, if you want to get really technical about it, but it would basically be a unanimous consent motion. But you don't have to take a vote on it. You don't have to describe it as that way. You just at the point where the meeting has reached its conclusion, you announce that the meeting is adjourned. Now, being a church, you probably want to have a prayer after that. But as far as ending the meeting, ending the business portion of the meeting, that would be the time for you just announce it's adjourned. A motion to adjourn serves no purpose in this situation. And something you might think about here, imagine having no business to consider, but then voting on a motion to adjourn. What are you going to do if people vote no? No one has anything they want to bring up, and yet they vote no. Now, of course, that seems like a silly situation. If they have nothing they want to discuss, then why would they vote no? But are they just going to sit there and look at each other? That's what you would end up with if the motion was voted down, and so there's really no reason to ask for pointless motions. And so the motion to adjourn when there's no business to consider is one of those pointless motions. Another way to end the meeting is when the hour of adjournment has been reached. And this is something that's not really typical in churches. It may be something you encounter, but it's going to be less typical than other ways of adjournment. At this point, we've had the moderator say we've reached the time of adjournment. The meeting is adjourned. And this would be a case where it could be the motion has set the time at which the meeting is to adjourn. Maybe people have decided they don't want to stay past 10 o'clock at night, and it could be, well, I mean, it could even be put in your bylaws or in your standing orders that you don't want to stay past a certain time. Whether or not that's a good idea or not, I mean, that's questionable, but that is the type of things that some churches will do. And so that is something that would happen. Maybe it's a case where you have the business meeting before a normal worship service. And so you want that worship service to start at a specific time. And most of the time, your business meeting doesn't last that long, so you think, okay, we can do that. But you want to make sure that you finish on time. And so whatever is going on, you will adjourn at that specific time. The only thing that would prevent you from doing that is if you were in the process of taking a vote. If you're discussing a motion, you would adjourn during that motion. You would pick it up later when you met again. It would fall under unfinished business. But because of having some set time for you to adjourn, you would need to adjourn at that time. So you would announce it that you were adjourned at that time. Then there's a way to adjourn a meeting when business is pending. This would be a case where a person who has the floor makes a motion, I move we adjourn. Every motion requires that someone obtain the floor first. So during the process of discussion, someone gets up, rather than discussing the motion, they make a motion to adjourn. Because this is a secondary motion, then that would be proper in that situation. So what the moderator would need to do then is say, there's a motion that we adjourn. Is there a second? Perhaps, or a lot of times, if people just say there's a second anyway, so whether you ask for it or not. Someone may second the motion. If not, if there isn't a second, then the motion dies and you keep going as usual. But assuming that there's a second, then the moderator would say the motion to adjourn is not available. We will now vote on the motion to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye. And it's important to note here that a motion to adjourn is not debatable. If you have a motion to adjourn to a time, that's debatable, but only to the extent that the time piece of it is debatable, not the actual motion to adjourn. So because it's a motion to adjourn, you don't debate on it, but obviously people who still have something to say will likely vote against it. People who think there are other people who have something to say or who want to vote on that motion, they will likely vote against the motion to adjourn. So that would be a case where there's a main motion on the floor. There could be other motions, secondary motions of various kinds, and the motion to adjourn supersedes all of those. So anytime there's a motion to adjourn, you have to handle it first. But you would ask for them to signify by saying aye. If the ayes have it, then the moderator says the meeting is adjourned. And then, of course, if the noes have it, then the meeting would continue with whatever you were dealing with at the time. So if there's discussion on a motion, you would continue the discussion on that motion. And then when business is pending, but people want to continue it later, there's ways of handling this. The person who has the floor says, we adjourn until 2 p.m. next Sunday. There's a motion, the moderator says there's a motion that we adjourn until 2 p.m. next Sunday. Is there a second? So it's seconded, and I should note here that my slide is slightly wrong here, saying the motion to adjourn is not debatable. We will now vote on the motion to adjourn until 2 p.m. next Sunday. In actual fact, the time to adjourn to would be debatable, whereas the motion to adjourn would not. All in favor signify by saying aye, and it's normal, just like any other motion to adjourn in a sense. So if the ayes have it, the moderator says we will continue our meeting next Sunday. The meeting is adjourned. And what this does is it sets up a meeting for the next Sunday, and so you at the next Sunday you will have a meeting, but it's going to be the same type of meeting that you're in when you adjourned. So if you're in a regular business meeting and you adjourn like this, but you adjourn until a certain time, then when you take up business the next Sunday, you're going to continue on with what you were doing at the time that you adjourned. There may be a few minor things that you take care of before you actually get into the business. Being a church, you're going to have prayer. You're going to have you may even have a little bit of singing before business meeting. But it's those types of things. Yeah, you may take care of those. But then when you get into the business piece of the meeting, you will pick up where you left off, and it's going to be that same type of meeting. So an adjourned meeting, if it's a regular business meeting that you were in, when you pick up that adjourned meeting, it's going to be that same regular business meeting. If you're in a special called meeting that's set up to handle a certain thing, when you adjourn and then you go back into that meeting the next Sunday, then you're still under those same limitations on what you can discuss, what you can make motions on, what thing you can do during that meeting. So if there's only one topic you're dealing with, but you've adjourned until the next Sunday, then you're still limited to that one topic. So now we're going to get into motions. You'll find that everything's a motion, or well, pretty much nearly everything. A motion is a formal proposal by one member to be enacted by all. So one member wants to do something, wants the church to agree that the church should do that, and so he makes a motion. Robert's Rules of Order newly revised list A6 unique forms of motions. We're not going to cover all of those as video. Most of those are going to be secondary motions. Some are rarely used. Some are used quite frequently. The best way to understand what those are is to look up in Robert's Rules of Order. They have quite a bit of information back of the book that is really helpful looking at those. Proper handling of motions helps everyone understand what is going on. One of the problems with motions is people don't understand. And it's not just that they don't understand how to make a motion, it's they don't understand what the motion is. And so someone will get up and make a motion. It may not be clearly worded. And so if it's not, it's really the responsibility of the moderator to make sure that's clearly worded, either to help them reword it in such a way that it's clearly worded, or sometimes the moderator can just reword it himself in a clear way. But it needs to be clear what people are actually going to be voting on. And so one person gets up, makes a motion, the moderator suggests a rewording, and it needs to be clear that they're going to be voting what the moderator said rather than what the person making the motion said. And so there's things like that. Then there's things like sometimes the moderator will say that something needs to be done and ask what people want to do about it, and someone will shout out, "So move," and so if you sometimes those "so moves" are sufficient, but then there's also cases where it's not clear what they intend to do with that, and so we have to be careful how we handle motions, so that we don't have cases where we kind of, someone thinks they know what's meant, and someone else thinks they knows what's meant, and different people have different ideas, and what the moderator thinks is being voted on, what the clerk thinks is being voted on, and what the person that made the motion thinks is being voted on are different things. And by handling motions correctly, we can avoid all of that. But it becomes difficult sometimes because improper handling of motions confuses people. It may result in things being done that are not what the church intended. The church may be happy to do something that they think they're voting on, but what they're voting on is something totally different, and so there can be confusion, and we need to make sure that does not happen. Fortunately, all motions are handled in a similar way. There's very little difference in how motions are handled. There are some differences in a few of them, but for the most part, they're handled in much the same way. First, look at a main motion. Now this is what you generally think of as the motion. This is the thing this is the initial motion to bring something up for consideration. If there's nothing else going on and somebody gets up and makes a motion, that would be the main motion. Once that motion is under consideration, no other motions can be made other than secondary motion. So you can only have one main motion at a time. There should not be any discussion without a main motion. And here I say good luck with that in a Baptist church. There's usually quite a lot of discussion that goes on concerning a lot of different things without a motion on the floor. Sometimes that works well. Sometimes it would be better if someone would actually make a motion before any of that discussion went on. A lot of times committees end up doing that. They'll have a lot of discussion, and it's less of a problem in the committees anyway, but there'll be a lot of discussion, and after they've pretty much decided what they want to do, then you think, well, maybe we should make a motion. And That's one of the difficulties. There's a lot of discussion, and people throw out a whole bunch of different ideas, but you know, you can't just vote to do all of them, because you may have conflicting ideas and various things. And so it's better to have a motion that's very specific about what needs to be, or what someone wants to do. If other people disagree with it, then fine. They can change them. They can amend, make a motion to amend, which would be a secondary motion. We'll cover that later. But there's ways of changing the motion so that it satisfies what people want to do. But there really should not be any discussion without a main motion. A person is recognized to speak, and they say, "I move that." That's how you recognize. That's how you identify that they're actually making a motion, rather than asking a question or something like that. Sometimes people will say something like, "I recommend that." That you really shouldn't. You really should take that as a motion. If it's just, if it's not actually a recommendation coming from a committee or something like that, the word recommend shouldn't be in there, because it's not clear that they, it makes it sound like they're just suggesting something, and they're not sure what they want to do, and it's better to require more specific language, so require that they actually move to do a certain thing. So dealing with making a main motion, a person rises and is recognized by the moderator to speak. Again, anytime somebody speaks, they should be doing so by rising and being recognized by the moderator. I would make a few exceptions in the case of, if there's a parliamentarian, that person should be able to speak to the moderator without rising and being recognized. He should be able to speak to the moderator, but he should also have a chair right next to the moderator. So he shouldn't be speaking through a mic to the moderator or anything like that. And he doesn't necessarily even need to be heard by anyone else, but he does need to be able to speak to the moderator. The other person I'd say is the clerk. The clerk may need to ask for clarification on something, and it's easier just to let the clerk speak to the moderator without having too much formality with it. And again, the clerk really ought to be seated close to the moderator anyway, and so that should not be much of a distraction. Anyone else should be required to rise, be recognized, either rise or raise their hand. That's something else they could do in smaller churches. If it's a larger church, definitely require them to go to a mic would be better. Again, that's not always easy to do. People don't like getting up and going to a mic. They tend to like to just speak up. And it's not always easy for a moderator to record that, but it is better if they do. So the person says something like, "I move that we pay Joe $10. Then someone shouts out second. You don't have to, for a second, you don't need to have them go to a mic. They don't really need to be recognized. You just need to know that there is someone else who supports the same motion. So having someone shout out second is fine. If no other motion is pending, the moderator says we have a motion and second. Is there any discussion to the motion that we pay Joe $10? At this point, the person who made the motion has first right to speak. If he wants to say why he thinks we ought to pay Joe $10, the moderator, at the point of discussion, the moderator ought to let that person speak first. Now, in actual fact, a lot of people will get up and speak and before they make the motion, and that's not really a problem most of the time, but it would be better if they would make the motion first, then speak to the motion, just for time's sake, really, because if if no one else believes that we ought to be paying Joe $10 and they're certain of that, then this may be something that we don't really want to spend a lot of time on. So having someone try to explain why they think that Joe ought to be paid $10 would just be a waste of time. It's going to be voted down anyway. So the person who made the motion has the first right to speak. After that person has spoken, other people may discuss and make secondary motions and etc. So now we'll look at important actions for a main motion. Of course, first of all, the motion has been made. This defines the proposal. In the example before, it's to pay Joe $10. So that defines what the proposal is, but then there's a second to the motion. This serves to eliminate proposals that no one wants. If you can't get somebody else to support your idea, then there's no reason for any discussion to occur. So we require a second for those motions. Now the exception to this is if there's a committee of at least 2 people. And the reason that there's an exception to this is because there's already 2 members who are in favor of the motion. If you have a committee of 2 and they have a recommendation, then it requires both of them to agree that yes, they want to make that recommendation. If you have a committee of 3, it requires at least 2 of them voted for making that recommendation. So what we have is, when they make that recommendation, the motion made for that recommendation, which would normally be done by the committee chair or someone else on the committee. So they make the motion. There's someone else on the committee that supports it. We don't have to determine whether or not there's someone else to support it. We already know. So there's no need for a second if a committee is making a recommendation. The simple truth is a lot of those motions will get a second, even though it's not required. Then next, the moderator states the question. And this is repeating the motion word for word. So repeating the motion word for word helps people who may not have heard it the first time. So someone got up. If they went to a mic, yeah, they may have been heard. It may be that someone up close to the front spoke. The moderator heard it clearly. This person stood up. They spoke. The moderator heard it. The clerk heard it. But everyone behind them may not hear quite as well. And then, of course, the people at the far back of the building, they may not have heard it at all. There's always people who are complaining they can't hear. So the moderator should state the motion, if for no other reason than to make sure that people heard it. The moderator should be standing at a mic if that capability is available. At the very least, the fact that he's standing in front of people and projecting his voice toward them is going to help them to understand. They can read his lips better than they can a person who is speaking and have their back to them. So stating the question or basically or stating the motion word for word helps people in that way. It also helps in the moderator's determination whether the motion is in order. When a motion is made, the moderator needs to make a determination: is this motion in order? For example, if a motion is on the floor, and so it's up for debate, and somebody's discussing this, and someone else gets up and they decide they want to do something else, and they make some other motion, and maybe they make a motion to amend the Constitution. Maybe a motion if the motion wasn't on the floor, but because that motion is under consideration, then they cannot be handled. And it could be during the discussion, someone identify the problem that, something's in the Constitution that they identify as being a problem that prevents them from doing something that they want to do with the motion that's being under consideration. So someone wants to amend the Constitution. Well, because that motion is pending, that motion to amend the Constitution, regardless of what the rules are for amending the Constitution, that motion would be out of order. And so the moderator needs to know that. He needs to be aware of what can be handled at that point. And it could be that he words that motion and says that motion's out of order. It could be that he helps identify how they can word that motion in order, but it's his responsibility to make sure that any motion that's presented is done so in order, and if not, then he needs to identify that not. If he makes a mistake in that, then there is the option of people having identifying a rule of identifying that and making a point of order. It also helps make sure the motion is clearly worded. Sometimes you'll get someone say something like "so move." The moderator should not reword the motion as "so move." He should instead word the motion properly. So if in the case of someone, maybe someone says, in our previous example, we had a motion to say, I move that we pay Joe $10. Suppose somebody didn't make that motion, but instead somebody has been discussing something and they say, I think we ought to pay Joe. And someone else says, well, I think we ought to pay him $10. And so now someone yells out, well, so move. And so now the moderator could say, well, there's a motion, but the only motion that's been made at that point is that so move. So to reword, to state the motion, what the moderator said is there's a motion that we pay Joe $10, rather than having this motion to move. And that's important because the clerk is going to have to record this in the minutes. It needs to know what to write there. If the motion is so move, you really don't want that in the minutes, because the clerk is not going to record all the discussion that's going on. Instead, the clerk records the motions, so the moderator should state that motion so that the clerk knows what to write. So continue important actions for a main motion. The next thing is going to be debate on the motion. This is the opportunity for people to discuss the motion and to offer amendments. And let people hear what other people think. Some people will get up and explain why they're in favor of a motion. Some people may jump and say why they're against it. They may not have suggestions on how to change the motion. They just may be for or against it. They will know that, and doing so may help other people determine how they want to vote. So it lets people hear what other people think. You may also save a motion from being voted down, only to be replaced by a civil motion. People discuss it, and they may make amendments to the motions that are made, and so once those amendments are in place, then more people may be in favor of the motion than were in favor of it before. So if there wasn't that to go on, then the motion might get voted down, and someone would make another motion that would be similar, but would be worded more like what they would have liked. Then next, the moderator puts the motion, and this is basically asking the people if they're ready to vote. So the moderator asks, are you ready to vote? Here, you need to to leave a little bit of time here, just seconds. I mean, not a whole lot of time, but enough time there for people to indicate whether they have more to say or not. If no one indicates otherwise, then the moderator would say the question is on the option of the motion that, in our example, would be that we pay Joe $10. So he's stating the motion again, but to make it clear that people, so people are clear on what they're voting on. And he says, all those in favor say aye, and all those opposed say no. With each of those, he needs to take the time. I mean, he can't just say it. He needs to wait for them to vote, of course. And there's other ways to vote. There could be a raise of hands. It could be have people stand. If there's some difficulty in determining whether the voice vote of aye and no, or which way it goes, and then he may have people raise their hand or stand to be counted. Of course, sometimes a motion requires a ballot, and so that would be required in some cases. Requires more difficulty to vote by ballot, but that is another way of putting the motion. We should state the motion because amendments and just general discussion may confuse people. You'll have a motion on the floor. Someone maybe made the motion to pay Joe $10. Someone else gets up and they say, I don't think that's enough, and I think we ought to pay him $100. And that's great, but until someone moves to amend that motion, the motion's still going to be $10. So that person gets up and makes that recommendation, and people that don't understand what's going on, they may be looking at saying, well, since they did that and it seems like everybody agrees with that, and that's what we're going to vote on. So they're thinking, okay, we're voting on paying him $100 rather than voting to pay him $10. So stating the motion as is will help people understand. So you state the motion, so since it's still that we paid Joe $10, you state that motion, and people know that they're voting on that motion to pay Joe $10. And that gives them a little bit of time to speak up and say, hey, wait a minute, I thought we were going to do this $100, and if they do, then you would say, well, we need to amend the motion to do that, and you, as a moderator, you should recommend how to do that, because people don't always understand that, and so it's helpful to, especially when you know people want to do that kind of thing, to make recommendations as far as how to do it. If it's not clear what people to do, then definitely rely more on them to make those motions. But if it is clear, then certainly you should, as a moderator, make suggestions. Then the moderator announces the result of the vote. So assuming we voted with aye and no, the moderator says ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The next item of business is, and those are the cases if the motion carries. So he announces what the result is so that people know what the vote is, and then moves on to the next item of business. If it's a no vote, then he'd say the noes have it. The motion fails. The next item of business is. Now, if that's the last item of business, then you might ask if there's additional business, and then, of course, you would adjourn after that, because if there was no business. But announcing the vote makes it clear what the result is, even if it seems obvious. there's been discussion about what happens if the moderator announces one thing and the vote was something else. Best I can tell from parliamentarians, if the moderator announces a vote one way and it was actually something else, then and nobody objects to it, then what the moderator says ends up being what it is. Now, there should be some objection if the moderator. I mean, it's not that the moderator gets to decide, but rather if people don't care enough to object when the moderator says the wrong thing, then that's what gets you into that situation. But the moderator makes that announcement. Whatever the moderator announces is then considered to be the official outcome. If later you come back and say, well, I think the result was something else. Because the moderator did announce it, then and that's what go on. That's what gets recorded in the minutes. And then if it needs to be changed later, you deal with it later. But whatever gets announced is what goes into the minutes. Announcing the vote helps the clerk, who may be distracted at the time the vote occurred. The clerk will be doing things that no one else in the room is doing, like recording motions and things, and they get behind. And while some of this stuff is going on, the clerk may be distracted. There may be a vote, and the clerk may be relying on the moderator to announce what that vote is, to know what to record. And then this thing about moving immediately to the next item of business helps them move the meeting along. We don't want people to stay on the same item of business and then get into a discussion about whether we should have voted the way we voted or not, and things like that. The moderator can help that by just moving on. If the moderator moves on, then everybody else will tend to follow. Then we look at secondary motions. A secondary motion is a motion that can be considered while a main motion is pending. They may impact the pending main motion in some way. An example of a secondary motion would be a motion to postpone a certain time. This would put a main motion aside till that time is reached. So you could be considering a motion, someone gets up and votes to, or makes a motion to postpone to a certain time. And after that is approved, then that main motion is put aside for the time being. And then when that certain time comes up, you pick up that motion again and begin discussion again. Another example, the secondary motion to amend. This modifies the wording of the motion. So we will look more at that as we look at amendments. That would be another secondary motion. So then we get into discussion. It's more than just stating an opinion. And this is, we've kind of talked about some of the stuff that goes on during discussion with talking about secondary motions. But discussion is also called debate. You'll find debate used more in Robert's Rules of Order. Discussion tends to be used more in churches. It sounds a little better. You don't like people talking about debating stuff so much. But it's a type of debate. People get up, they present their point of view. Other people get up, they present their point of view. There's that back and forth between the two sides that you would have in a debate. Every main motion and some secondary motion debatable. You have to look at each secondary motion and see if it is debatable. About half of them are. Debate occurs after the motion is made and seconded. The moderator should ask for discussion and give people time to respond. And I've already talked about that some. It is during this time that people state their opinion, offer amendments, or substitute motions. So that brings us into the topic of amendments and substitute motions. This is probably the thing that gives moderators most nightmares. And so, for example, of an amendment, you might say, I move that we replace the word 3 with the word 5. So if there's a motion that maybe you purchase 3 of something, and so someone, the proper wording to amend that would be for someone to just say, well, to move to replace 3 with 5. So if that amendment were approved, then the main motion would become that. So it would become, so if the motion is, I move that we purchase 3 Bibles or whatever. So I actually leave off the word whatever, but I move that we purchase 3 Bibles. And then someone gets up and says, I move that we replace the word 3 with 5. And the amendment gets voted on. If the ayes have it, then the main motion becomes, I move we purchase 5 Bibles. And so then that motion's still under discussion and will need to be voted on. A substitute motion is just an amendment that replaces the whole motion with different wording. So you could have a motion that we purchase 3 Bibles. Now we want to have a substitute motion. I move that we, the substitute motion would be to purchase maybe 5 hymn books. And so you've taken the wording of one motion and replace it with another. And so, but it's really just an amendment of the motion. It replaces all of that wording. And so you would handle it in the same way you would handle an amendment. And technically, a substitute motion should be, once the substitute motion is approved, then you would still have the main motion, even though it's the same wording. A lot of times, once the substitute motion is approved, then the people won't bother to vote on the main motion. And there's really not a problem there unless there are a few cases where it could be a problem, particularly when you get into with substitutes and amendments. You can amend an amendment, but you can't amend an amendment to an amendment. And so to be able to amend some things, you might have to go back to, you may want to get back to the main motion. You may even have a substitute motion, and then you may want to amend that. And so there's some difficulties there that you may want to get back to the main motion, even though, and still continue that discussion, even though the substitute motion has been voted on. And so you need to be careful about that. If it's a case where that substitute motion satisfies what everyone wants to do, and it's not going to be a problem if everybody's okay with it. But you need to be careful about doing that kind of thing. So why are amendments so scary? And here I have this statement: amendments to a main motion can be amended, but amendments to amendments can't be until they become amendments, at which point they can be amended. If you read that wording and understand it, amendments are not scary. But most people are going to look at that wording, they're going to say, I don't get that, and that scares me, and that's understandable. Well, let's see if we can make them less scary. Let's take a motion to pay Joe $10. So this is an amendable main motion. So because the main motion is amendable, we want to pay, someone wanted to pay Joe $10. Someone gets up and um, makes a motion, going to amend by replacing paid Joe $10 with paid Jane $100. So this is an amendable secondary motion. They are amending the motion by really they're just changing person and the amount of money. It's the same type of motion, so it's acceptable. You do need to stay on the with amendments, but but here we're changing the motion for the person and the money. There may be a reason why you want to do that. So you have a second motion that's being amended. Technically, you could then amend that by replacing Jane with Joe. It's or someone else actually. You replace Jane with Joe or whatever, and so now you have that amendment cannot be amended. So we want to put a stop to this at some point, and so this is the point we put a stop to it. So we have our motion, and then we have our let me get a pointer over here so I can kind of show you what's going on. But so we have a motion to pay Joe $10. That's our first motion. When we amend it, you can think, okay, we step down the level. So to keep track of that, you might want to write the amendment as kind of an offset of the main motion, so that you kind of an outline, just as I've done here. So we have a motion to pay Joe $10, which becomes amended. The amendment would be to pay Jane $10, and then someone wants to change Jane to something else, so that becomes amendment to amendment. That one also would be offset, and so we have to handle the lowest one first. So this motion to amend by replacing Jane with Joe needs to be handled first. Assuming that this is approved, then we go back to the motion above it, which is our original amendment, but now it has been replaced with paid Joe, and now it becomes pay Joe $10, because essentially the idea to pay Jane has gone away at this point. Now we're paying Joe $10. That amendment needs to be voted on. So you're still at this lower level, and you need to vote on that before moving on. You'll either accept that or reject it, so that vote will determine that. You handle that like any other motion. You announce what has happened with that. And then, assuming it's approved, now we're back to our main motion, which is to pay Joe $100, because we have amended the motion a couple of times, actually. And so our new motion is now to pay Joe $100, and assuming there's no more amendment to the motion, you would vote on this, and now your main motion is off the floor, and you're ready to go on to the next item of business. But the main thing here is you need to, the easiest thing so if you have an amendment, you just move over, indent a level with each one. And if you have an amendment to amendment, then you indent, and you don't want to go more than 2 levels deep. And actually, Robert's Rules of Order prevents you from doing that if you're going by Robert's Rules of Order. That kind of keeps things a little bit neater. Hopefully you don't have too many times when you're amending an amendment, but you do have that option, and people will exercise that option from time to time. And now we look at this word question, closing debate by moving the previous question. The motion to move the previous question is the proper way to propose bringing discussion to a close. So basically, you have discussion going on for a motion, and a lot of times what happens is people get tired of the discussion and somebody yell out question. And some people seem to have this idea that if they yell out question, that is going to bring discussion to a close. Sometimes it's a case where things kind of get quiet, somebody yells out question, and they think that's going to bring it to a close. And maybe it will. I mean, in the sense that the moderator may look at it and say, oh yeah, there's really no reason. There's no one else coming to speak, so we'll go ahead and vote on it. But yelling question is actually improper. The proper way to handle this is to move the previous question. Now, it may be worded differently. Sometimes the word is I move with vote now, or I call question. But it should only be permitted by someone who has the floor. So they should, assuming you have a situation where you have microphones set up, they should go to the mic. They should not be yelling out question. They should go to the mic and say, I move, we vote now, if you want to use informal wording. The more formal wording would be, I move the previous question. It requires a second. It requires a majority vote. Now, obviously, this is not a motion that can be discussed. If the whole purpose is to end discussion, you don't want a discussion about whether you should end discussion. So a motion to move the previous question is not a motion that can be discussed. So if someone makes that motion, the moderator should, and of course you have the second, then the moderator should immediately take a vote. And of course they should state what the motion is, possibly explain that this is going to end discussion. A lot of people may not realize that moving the previous question ends discussion. So if that motion made them, they may need somebody to make it clear to them that it's going to end discussion and they're going to vote on whatever that question is immediately. So it requires a majority vote, and just someone yelling out question is not sufficient. So we've reached the hour point again, so I'm going to end this video at this point and do another video for part 3, which will start up with postpone, refer, a table, which will be delaying a decision until later.